Hello Blender folks, welcome, I'm epistemic-gnomes and this is WikiRigs, organic rigging tutorials for Blender. Here we're going to talk about fan bones. So this is a fan bone, for example. It is called a fan bone because in this particular case of a simple joint of the knee, as I pose the leg, the mechanism of the bones looks like just as if it were an oriental fan. And the fan bone is a helper bone or a set of helper bones. In this case, it's a simple deform bone. In this case, it is extremely simple to set up. So basically, if I go on rest position on edit mode, I can see that the fan bone is parented, offset to the deform shin bone, this one. And it is positioned exactly on the joint from its head. As for its orientation, so I first had it aligned with the same bone to which it is parented and then rotated, in this case 90 degrees positive, and there we go. So this is pose mode, and here we have the mechanism effect of the fan. I've made this way because it would be simpler to visualize the allegory of the oriental fan bone. However, personally, I prefer to have it totally aligned with the same bone to which it is parented. Here. And don't worry, this is just segments from belly bones. Then on pose mode, we can see that the fan bone has got only one bone constraint. It's a copy rotation with the following settings. So it targets the deformed shin bone, which is its parent, right, on all the rotation axes, but then it will invert all those rotations on all axes simultaneously, so that on a certain degree of influence. That means that, for example, if I have a 100% influence, this copy rotation is like an absolute derotation of all the rotations of the parenting relation. So it's like it neutralizes at least the rotational input from the parenting relation. And by taking influence to 0, it would be like having no derotation at all. It's like the fan bone is just copying from the parenting relation all the rotations. However, having it on a different degree of influence here, I can have a derotation, a proportional derotation. So for example, 0.5, 50% derotation of the fan bone, and so that would be like, you see an angle here of 90 degrees, so the fan bone is half derotating, it's lagging behind, right? So it's 45 degrees there. And why does that matter? Well, it's because the fan bone, here working as a deformed bone, is responsible for derotating a portion of the mesh on the joint. So that will prevent or help prevent some artifacts generated on the joint region caused by excessive rotation of the deformed bones, one in relation to the other. Right? Because we have a blended waves region on the knee joint in this case, and the fan bone, which may hold certain waves. There are many ways to develop this, but here it's even inappropriate. But the idea is that it will hold, as a deformed helper bone, some waves that will help derotate the mesh, so that as we get, for example, this heavy rotation here, very high rotation here, then with the fan bone rotating on the opposite direction but still aligned, even though in an opposite way to the shin bone, it will derotate the mesh, and the mesh that matters, even though the mesh there will still rotate, then we can derotate some mesh in the regions which are most affected. So for example, here I can probably improve this region. if I turn off the deform property of the fan bone, we can see that is much worse. And so all it is doing is derotating the critical mesh, the mesh that we see that is having a terrible day out there. A more analytic way to attempt to get the better waves for the fan bone would be, instead of making something more intuitive like I've done here, and it's not bad but it probably can be better, is that if I delete that thing and I pick the wave paint, the vertex group from the shin bone here, I'm going to duplicate this vertex group. It's at the bottom here, but I need the name of the fan bone here, and then I can paste it here. So now that the fan bone has got the same wave painting of the shin bone, except that now I'm going to subtract waves from the fan bone because I just want to focus its waves on the mesh near the joint that I want to derotate, and it's probably not these ones on the bottom, it's more the mesh that is closer to the joint. The other wave paint had additional waves there which were useful, and so not often this approach I'm doing is necessarily better, but it can help to get some organization. And of course we can make changes to it, but the interesting point in this approach is that I'm making changes on top of an already equal vertex group. So basically, because this bone derotates what this rotates, so having these similarities of the wave painting between those two bones can be interesting for more precision, but ultimately what will work better is what wave paint makes it looks better. So it's not like that would be a perfect approach, but that can help organize. So here I've made some extension there because I knew it would be useful, and so this is also a way to do it. But you see, the original one previously for some reason was better, and of course this may be related to some things here that I could also improve in all those things. But if I turned off the deform property of the fan bone, we see that this is not as good as this is, and this is just a single helper deform bone. So this is why this can be very interesting and powerful. So after we have some wave painting, we can also make some tests here to see which degree of derotation is better, because this also depends on the wave painting relations. Usually the influence for this approach would be somewhere very slow, like 0.1 towards 0.3, but it varies. It really depends on the wave painting setup. Before original for the mix, this is just for manual posing if we need, but probably we could have replaced, but then I cannot, well, oh, because of the influence, okay, if it is influence or that we cannot, but replace before original is okay. And for this case, this was a better setup. And target an owner on local spaces, both, so that the derotation of the copy rotation bone constraint will always work in sync with the parenting relation between those two bones. Thanks for watching, folks. If you find this helpful, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more of WikiRigs.